434, chapters 46 and 47 of The Count of Monte Cristo. Book talk begins at 6:44.
Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 434, Layers. This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by its listeners. Many thanks and much gratefulness to all of the listeners who have gone over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledged their support to the show. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Well, hello. Welcome back to our last week of Craftlit in the month of November for 2016. This is because my older son is going to go on a college visit next weekend, and then there's Thanksgiving. So for those of you who have been listening for a very long time, I'm sorry to have just knocked you on your tuchus. But there it is. Yes, we are going to our first college visit. He is 16. If anybody knows anyone at CalArts in Southern California, please let me know. Heather@craftlit.com. Or call 206-350-1642. So I'm in shock. He's taller than me. He's older than It's not that I never thought he'd be 16. It's just, wow, how'd that happen so fast? So, college visit. I'll let you know how it goes. Well, no crafty chat for this week. If you're new to the show, you should know that we have a live stream every Tuesday at 1:30 Eastern. Any week that we're going to have an episode, we have a live stream, and you are more than welcome to come and join us and hop in the chat window and chat back and forth with us on YouTube. And our YouTube channel is youtube.com/C, little letter C, /craftlit-channel. From there, you can get to our YouTube live streams and jump in the chat window and talk to us and have fun and hang out with all the really cool people who tend to show up there. We've got a nice crew, so that's good. And on that note, a little bit of listener feedback.
Hi, it's Tricia in Massachusetts, and it's Election Day, and I want to thank you for the Craftlit app, because without the app, I don't know what I'd be listening to on my commute home. I can't stand to listen to another word about any of the candidates. There's nothing new to say. There's no reason to discuss them anymore. So I am very happy to be listening to 3 Men in a Boat, not to mention the dog. I think I messed up the title, but you get that's what I mean. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Hi, Heather. My name is Paige. I just wanted to say it is November post-election 2016, and I just finished binge listening to Sense and Sensibility. I've known about your podcast for a while, but truth be told, I didn't know the definition of annotated, and so I didn't know that you had all the awesome research and facts and figures and history. And so I was giving myself a break from audiobooks because I got poor because it's holiday season, and scrounged up your podcast and listened to Jane Austen and absolutely fell in love with it. And I just wanted to say thank you, because in this season of craziness on all sides, I just appreciated the fact that people are looking at history and the future at the same time. And I just think that's cool that you're part of a group that's doing that. So high fives and thanks for what you do.
Hello, Heather. This is Sarah Worcester-Wait on Ravelry and Worcester Wait on Instagram. I was just listening to chapter 45, and I have a few tidbits for you in regards to things I thought about whilst I was listening. L'Arcachon, or your thoughts on L'Arcachon being the one who stabbed the jeweler? Yes, I believe it was L'Arcachon who stabbed the jeweler as well, because beforehand she was being very nice, gaining his trust, being a welcome hostess, getting in closer to him so that whenever she appeared in his room later on at night to off him, he wouldn't resist much, knock on the door, Monsieur, I have to come in, blah, 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 do this thing with here, stab you in the gut, take your money. It's a women's prerogative. Women as murderous impulses don't go for guns. They're too cold and distant. We'll go more in for the hands-on kill. There's that. And the comment you made about Monte Cristo mentioning what Abbe Bouchonnet said about evil, how there are two things to cure it or to quell it. It reminded me of the beginning of the movie, Mr. Incredible saves a man by jumping off of these train tracks to catch him as he was committing suicide out this window. And the guy's laying on the ground, I think you broke something. And Mr. Incredible goes, don't worry, with time and therapy, you'll come to forgive me. That was the thought I had, silence and, what he had said, and I was like, time and therapy. That's funny. And I'm getting all these little references to modern day culture from this book, and I am reveling in it. I got kind of bored, I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of character development, a lot of backstory, a lot of talking from the different characters, and it's one of those, okay, we've hit a yawn part of the book, and then it gets interesting again, and I am loving it. I can't wait until the next chapter. I wonder what will happen next. I'll talk to you later, Heather. Bye.
We have many, many layers coming up in The Count of Monte Cristo. We are almost halfway through the book, and we are now finally hitting the point in the text where the Count of Monte Cristo starts to reveal to us some of the many layers of plot he has been hatching back in the background for the last 10 years. And because this is all a particularly rich plot that he's been plotting, there are a lot of intricacies. And you may want to bookmark these chapters, today's 2 chapters, because we're going to do 2. Originally, I'd said we'd just do 1, but the more I listened, the more I thought, no, we really need to get through both of these today, because they're good. So pretty much the chapters from here to the end of 2016 are going to be our first big reveal to us, again, not to people in the book, just to us, of all of the things that he's been working on. Some of this will make sense to us. Some of it will be hints of things to come that we won't necessarily understand why he's doing some of the things he's doing. But the important thing for us is to know that he's doing them. For the first time today, we're going to get to see another servant kind of up close. His name is Baptistine. He's the valet de chambre, and he's pretty interesting in what the Count reveals to us about him, but also in his response. You should also know that at this time, the wages that would have been paid to an artisan, a stonemason, or even an engineer, somebody who, figured out how to build a bridge or something like that, would be about 2 francs a day. So just keep that in mind when you hear about the wages that the Count of Monte Cristo is paying his staff member. That's just something to keep in mind. You will hear a reference to the coastline, the northern coastline of France between Le Havre and Boulogne. This is going from just above where the D-Day operations happened on the northern coast of Normandy, up almost all the way to Dunkirk, almost all the way to the border with Brussels. Just to give you an idea, it's about maybe 250 kilometers total of coastline, somewhere around there. But that's just to give you a point of reference. Fécamp is another place on the coastline, and it is closer to Le Havre, between Le Havre and Boulogne. It's almost exactly across from Brighton. It's a little further east, across the channel. And then you'll hear about a reference to Chalon. This is closer to the Switzerland border, about halfway between Marseille and Paris. And that would be on a river called the Saône, S-A-O-N-E, with the little roof over the O. That's the technical term, of course. And Martigues is just west of Marseille, also on the southern coast of France. So you have quite a few different places that are going to get referenced all very quickly. They are all on water or near water, and that's all you need to know about those right now. As before, anytime we have heard about white, as in white fabric, white clothing, white upholstery, we know that that is an indication of someone's net wealth, because you are not going to wear white clothes or upholster in white fabric if you aren't particularly wealthy. It's very hard to keep clean at this time, and that would be kind of a showy thing to do. Also, white and gold as a way of going about your decorating for your home would be considered quite ostentatious. Remember that this is post-French Revolution, post-Napoleon. This is Louis Philippe, who, even though he is the king, there is at least an awareness that the government is a citizen government. It is not a monarchy the way that it had been run pre-French Revolution. And so to have that kind of gilt edge on your home would be, well, honestly, it would be a sign of you being new money. This is what we're aiming at when you hear about somebody's home being appointed in such a way. Because some things, evidently, don't change. You will still hear cracks like this. Montmorency and Lafayette. These were two men who were present during the part of the French Revolution that was not taken up with the Reign of Terror. This is when Lafayette helped write the Declaration of the Rights of Man, when they were debating how to have a government that would run France, what it was going to look like. One of the questions was honorifics and titles. What were they going to do about people like the Marquis de Lafayette? And the answer is Lafayette and quite a few other men, Montmorency included, thought it was important to do away with honorifics that were tied to heredity. If it was a family name, like the Marquis de Lafayette, his last name wouldn't have been Lafayette. And in fact, Montmorency actually got kind of ticked off because the journalists went gung-ho into this and dropped everybody's not only honorific, but titled name, which meant that as they would write about people in the press, they were referring to them by names that nobody knew, which made it a little hard for everyone to follow what was going on. So there was some drama around that. But Lafayette and Montmorency voluntarily said, it's time to do away with this. So Marquis de Lafayette stopped being Marquis de Lafayette, and instead of doing away with the last name Lafayette, eventually became Monsieur Lafayette. So not Monseigneur, not Marquis, just Monsieur, which will come up today as part of an extended joke / dig from the Count towards another character. Rothschild and Lafitte, you probably know, or you probably have heard these names bandied about. These were gentlemen who had a lot of money, so they ran banks. And that probably gives you a hint about who we're going to be meeting today, or meeting in some detail today. As before, when Dumas is going through lists of artists, usually it's with a point. In previous chapters, it's been because he was promoting friends of his who were up-and-coming artists. Today, you will hear references to artists who are older and not particularly popular at the time that Dumas was writing. Not only that, but you'll hear something about the registry. The registry was a period around the French Revolution when the government was held in the hands of 5 men. These people made up the registry, and they determined not just governmental things, but also things like what we value as a society. And by the time Dumas was writing, the directory wasn't really held in such high regard with 20/20 hindsight and all of that. So that'll give you another hint about a dig that Dumas is making by way of the Count of Monte Cristo's attitude towards people in the book. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he was an Enlightenment philosopher. If you have heard anything about him, even casually, it probably is the Noble Savage thing that he wrote. He was also the author of a very important treatise on education called Emile. He felt that nature and looking at nature, human nature, but nature also capital N nature, was important. But he was also pretty strict when push came to shove. So you'll hear that someone's treatment of their child would not have been pleasing to Rousseau. And that means that they're a little bit too easygoing on the child. And that is really it for today for our pre-chapter talk. I wanted to dive right in because our chapters today are long, but so good. This also begins, I think, the set of funniest chapters we've had to date. The Count is actively attempting to throw people off guard. And I found the first chapter today just absolutely hilarious. I've listened to it several times now, not because I needed to so much as because I really needed a laugh. And I found it to be really quite funny. So I hope you enjoy it as well. Today we listen to chapters 46 and 47, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Here we go.
Chapter 46. Unlimited Credit. About 2 o'clock the following day, a calash, drawn by a pair of magnificent English horses, stopped at the door of Monte Cristo, and a person dressed in a blue coat with buttons of a similar colour, a white waistcoat over which was displayed a massive gold chain, brown trousers, and a quantity of black hair descending so low over his eyebrows as to leave it doubtful whether it were not artificial, so little did its jetty glossiness assimilate with the deep wrinkles stamped on his features. A person, in a word, who, although evidently past 50, desired to be taken for not more than 40, bent forwards from the carriage door, on the panels of which were emblazoned the armorial bearings of a baron, and directed his groom to inquire at the porter's lodge whether the Count of Monte Cristo resided there, and if he were within. While waiting, the occupant of the carriage surveyed the house, the garden as far as he could distinguish it, and the livery of servants who passed to and fro with an attention so close as to be somewhat impertinent. His glance was keen, but showed cunning rather than intelligence. His lips were straight and so thin that as they closed they were drawn in over the teeth. His cheekbones were broad and projecting, a never-failing proof of audacity and craftiness, while the flatness of his forehead and the enlargement of the back of his skull, which rose much higher than his large and coarsely shaped ears, combined to form a physiognomy anything but prepossessing, save in the eyes of such as considered that the owner of so splendid an equipage must needs be all that was admirable and enviable, more especially when they gazed on the enormous diamond that glittered in his shirt, and the red ribbon that depended from his buttonhole. The groom, in obedience to his orders, tapped at the window of the porter's lodge, saying, "Pray, does not the Count of Monte Cristo live here?" "His Excellency does reside here," replied the concierge. "But," added he, glancing an inquiring look at Ali. Ali returned a sign in the negative. "But what?" asked the groom. "His Excellency does not receive visitors to-day." "Then here is my master's card, the Baron Danglars. You will take it to the Count and say that, although in haste to attend the chamber, my master came out of his way to have the honour of calling upon him." "I never speak to his Excellency," replied the concierge. "The valet de chambre will carry your message." The groom returned to the carriage. "Well?" asked Danglars. The man, somewhat crestfallen by the rebuke he had received, repeated what the concierge had said. "Bless me," murmured Baron Danglars. "This must surely be a prince instead of a count, by their styling him Excellency, and only venturing to address him by the medium of his valet de chambre. However, it does not signify he has a letter of credit on me, so I must see him when he requires his money." Then throwing himself back in his carriage, Danglars called out to his coachman, in a voice that might be heard across the road, "To the Chamber of Deputies." Apprised in time of the visit paid him, Monte Cristo had, from behind the blinds of his pavilion, as minutely observed the Baron by means of an excellent lorgnette, as Danglars himself had scrutinized the house, garden, and servants. "That fellow has a decidedly bad countenance," said the Count in a tone of disgust, as he shut up his glass into its ivory case. "How comes it that all do not retreat in aversion at sight of that flat, receding, serpent-like forehead, round, vulture-shaped head, and sharp-hooked nose, like the beak of a buzzard, Ali?" cried he, striking at the same time on the brazen gong. Ali appeared. "Summon Bertuccio," said the Count. Almost immediately Bertuccio entered the apartment. "Did your Excellency desire to see me?" inquired he. "I did," replied the Count. "You no doubt observed the horses standing a few minutes since at the door." "Certainly, your Excellency. I noticed them for their remarkable beauty." "Then how comes it," said Monte Cristo with a frown, "that when I desired you to purchase for me the finest pair of horses to be found in Paris, there is another pair fully as fine as mine not in my stables?" At the look of displeasure, added to the angry tone in which the Count spoke, Ali turned pale and held down his head. "It is not your fault, my good Ali," said the Count in the Arabic language, and with a gentleness none would have thought him capable of showing either in the voice or face. "It is not your fault. You do not understand the points of English horses." The countenance of poor Ali recovered its serenity. "Permit me to assure your Excellency," said Bertuccio, "that the horses you speak of were not to be sold when I purchased yours." Monte Cristo shrugged his shoulders. "It seems, Sir Steward," said he, "that you have not yet to learn that all things are to be sold to such as care to pay the price. His Excellency is not perhaps aware that Monsieur Danglars gave 16,000 francs for his horses. Very well. Then offer him double that sum. A banker never loses an opportunity of doubling his capital." "Is your Excellency really in earnest?" inquired the steward. Monte Cristo regarded the person who durst presume to doubt his words with a look of one equally surprised and displeased. "I have to pay a visit this evening," replied he. "I desire that these horses, with completely new harness, may be at the door with my carriage." Bertuccio bowed, and was about to retire, but when he reached the door he paused and then said, "At what o'clock does your Excellency wish the carriage and the horses to be ready?" "At 5 o'clock," replied the Count. "I beg your Excellency's pardon," interposed the steward in a deprecating manner, "for venturing to observe that it is already 2 o'clock." "I am perfectly aware of that fact," answered Monte Cristo calmly. Then turning towards Ali, he said, "Let all horses in my stables be led before the windows of your young lady, that she may select those she prefers for her carriage. Request her also to oblige me by saying whether it is her pleasure to dine with me. If so, let dinner be served in her apartment. Now leave me, and desire my valet de chambre to come hither." Scarcely had Ali disappeared when the valet entered the chamber. "Monsieur Baptistine," said the Count, "you have been in my service 1 year, the time I generally give myself to judge of the merits or demerits of those about me. You suit me very well." Baptistine bowed low. "It only remains for me to know whether I also suit you." "Oh, your Excellency!" exclaimed Baptistine eagerly. "Listen, if you please, till I have finished speaking," replied Monte Cristo. "You receive a 1,500 francs per annum for your services here, more than many a brave subaltern who continually risks his life for his country obtains. You live in a manner far superior to many clerks who work 10 times harder than you do for their money. Then, though yourself a servant, you have other servants to wait upon you, take care of your clothes, and see that your linen is duly prepared for you. Again, you make a profit upon each article you purchase for my toilet, amounting in the course of a year to a sum equalling your wages." "Nay, indeed, your Excellency." I am not condemning you for this, Monsieur Baptistine, but let your profits end here. It would be long, indeed, ere you would find so lucrative a post as that you have now the good fortune to fill. I neither ill-use nor ill-treat my servants by word or action. An error I readily forgive, but wilful negligence or forgetfulness, never. My commands are ordinarily short, clear, and precise, and I would rather be obliged to repeat my words twice or even 3 times than they should be misunderstood. I am rich enough to know whatever I desire to know, and I can promise you I am not wanting in curiosity. If, then, I should learn that you had taken upon yourself to speak of me to anyone favourably or unfavourably, to comment on my actions or watch my conduct, that very instant you would quit my service. You may now retire. I never caution my servants a second time. Remember that." Baptistine bowed and was proceeding toward the door. "I forgot to mention to you," said the Count, "that I lay yearly aside a certain sum for each servant in my establishment. Those who I am compelled to dismiss lose, as a matter of course, all participation in this money, while their portion goes to the fund accumulating for those domestics who remain with me, and among whom it will be divided at my death. You have been in my service a year. Your fund has already begun to accumulate. Let it continue to do so." This address, delivered in the presence of Ali, who, not understanding one word of the language in which it was spoken, stood wholly unmoved, produced an effect on Monsieur Baptistine only to be conceived by such as have occasion to study the character and disposition of French domestics. "I assure your Excellency," said he, "that at least it shall be my study to merit your approbation in all things, and I will take Monsieur Ali as my model." "By no means," replied the Count in the most frigid tones. "Ali has many faults mixed with most excellent qualities. He cannot possibly serve you as a pattern for your conduct, not being as you are a paid servant, but a mere slave, a dog, who, should he fail in his duty toward me, I should not discharge from my service, but kill." Baptistine opened his eyes with astonishment. "You seem incredulous," said Monte Cristo, who repeated to Ali in the Arabic language what he had just been saying to Baptistine in French. The Nubian smiled assentingly to his master's words, then kneeling on one knee respectfully kissed the hand of the Count. This corroboration of the lesson he had just received put the finishing stroke to the wonder and stupefaction of Monsieur Baptistine. The Count then motioned the valet de chambre to retire, and to Ali to follow to his study, where they conversed long and earnestly together. As the hand of the clock pointed to 5, the Count struck thrice upon his gong. When Ali was wanted 1 stroke was given, 2 summoned Baptistine, and 3 Bertuccio. The steward entered. "My horses?" said Monte Cristo. "They are at the door, harnessed to the carriage, as your Excellency desired. Does your Excellency wish me to accompany him?" "No, the coachman, Ali, and Baptistine will go." The Count descended to the door of his mansion, and beheld his carriage drawn by the very pair of horses he had so much admired in the morning as the property of Danglars. As he passed them he said, "They are extremely handsome, certainly, and you have done well to purchase them, although you were somewhat remiss not to have procured them sooner." "Indeed, your Excellency, I had very considerable difficulty in obtaining them, and as it is they have cost an enormous price." "Does the sum you gave for them make the animals less beautiful?" inquired the Count, shrugging his shoulders. "Nay, if your Excellency is satisfied, it is all that I would wish. Whither does your Excellency desire to be driven?" "To the residence of Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chaussée-d'Antin." This conversation had passed as they stood upon the terrace from which a flight of stone steps led to the carriage drive. As Bertuccio, with a respectful bow, was moving away, the Count called him back. "I have another commission for you, Monsieur Bertuccio," said he. "I am desirous of having an estate by the seaside in Normandy, For instance, between Havre and Boulogne. You see, I gave you a wide range. It will be absolutely necessary that the place you may select have a small harbour, creek, or bay, into which my corvette can enter and remain at anchor. She draws only 15 feet. She must be kept in constant readiness to sail immediately I think proper to give the signal. Make the requisite inquiries for a place of this description, and when you have met with an eligible spot, visit it, and if it possess the advantage desired, purchase it at once in your own name. The corvette must now, I think, be on her way to Fécamp, must she not? Certainly, Your Excellency. I saw her put to sea the same evening we quitted Marseille. And the yacht? Was ordered to remain at Martigues. 'Tis well. I wish you to write from time to time to the captains in charge of the two vessels, so as to keep them on the alert. And the steamboat? She is at Chalons? Yes. The same orders for her as for the two sailing vessels. Very good. When you have purchased the estate I desire, I want constant relays of horses at 10 leagues apart along this northern and southern road. Your Excellency may depend upon me. The Count made a gesture of satisfaction, descended the terrace steps, and sprang into his carriage, which was whirled along swiftly to the banker's house. Danglars was engaged at that moment presiding over a railroad committee, but the meeting was nearly concluded when the name of his visitor was announced. As the Count's title sounded on his ear, he rose, and addressing his colleagues, who were members of one or other of the chamber, he said, "Gentlemen, pardon me for leaving you so abruptly, but a most ridiculous circumstance has occurred, which is this. Thomson and French, the Roman bankers, have sent to me a certain person calling himself the Count of Monte Cristo, and have given him an unlimited credit with me. I confess this is the drollest thing I have ever met with in course of my extensive foreign transactions, and you may readily suppose it has greatly roused my curiosity. I took the trouble this morning to call on the pretended Count. If he were a real count, he wouldn't be so rich. But would you believe it? He was not receiving. So the master of Monte Cristo gives himself airs befitting a great millionaire or a capricious beauty. I made inquiries, and found that the house in the Champs-Élysées is his own property, and certainly it was very decently kept up, but, pursued Danglars with one of his sinister smiles, an order for unlimited credit calls for something like caution on the part of the banker to whom that order is given. I am very anxious to see this man. I suspect a hoax is intended, but the instigators of it little knew whom they had to deal with. They laugh best who laugh last." Having delivered himself of this pompous address, uttered with a degree of energy that left the Baron almost out of breath, he bowed to the assembled party and withdrew to his drawing-room, whose sumptuous furnishings of white and gold had caused a great sensation in the Chaussée d'Antin. It was to this apartment he had desired his guest to be shown, with the purpose of overwhelming him at the sight of so much luxury. He found the Count standing before some copies of Albano and Fattore that had been passed off to the banker as originals, but which, mere copies as they were, seemed to feel their degradation in being brought into juxtaposition with the gaudy colours that covered the ceiling. The Count turned round as he heard the entrance of Danglars into the room. With a slight inclination of the head, Danglars signed to the Count to be seated, pointing significantly to a gilded armchair covered with white satin embroidered with gold. The Count sat down. "I have the honour, I presume, of addressing a Monsieur de Monte Cristo." The Count bowed. "And I of speaking to Baron Danglars, Chevalier of the Legion of Honour and a member of the Chamber of Deputies." Monte Cristo repeated all the titles he had read on the Baron's card. Danglars felt the irony and compressed his lips. "You will, I trust, excuse me, monsieur, for not calling you by your title when I first addressed you," he said. but you are aware that we are living under a popular form of government, and that I myself a representative of the liberties of the people." "So much so," replied Monte Cristo, "that while you call yourself Baron, you are not willing to call anybody else Count." "Upon my word, monsieur," said Danglars with affected carelessness, "I attach no sort of value to such empty distinctions, but the fact is, I was made Baron, and also Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, in return for services rendered, but—" "But you have discarded your titles after the example set you by Messrs. de Montmorency and Lafayette. That was a noble example to follow, monsieur." "Why," replied Danglars, "not entirely so. With the servants, you understand." "I see. To your domestics you are 'my lord.' The journalists style you 'monsieur,' while your constituents call you 'citizen.' These are distinctions very suitable under a constitutional government. I understand perfectly." Again Danglars bit his lips. He saw that he was no match for Monte Cristo in an argument of this sort, and he therefore hastened to turn to subjects more congenial. "Permit me to inform you, Count," said he, bowing, "that I have received a letter of advice from Thomson and French of Rome." "I am glad to hear it, Baron, for I must claim the privilege of addressing you after the manner of your servants. I have acquired the bad habit of calling persons by their titles from living in a country where barons are still barons by right of birth. But as regards the letter of advice, I am charmed to find that it has reached you. That will spare me the troublesome and disagreeable task of coming to you for money myself. You have received a regular letter of advice." "Yes," said Danglars, "but I confess I didn't quite comprehend its meaning." "Indeed." "And for that reason I did myself the honour of calling upon you in order to beg for an explanation." "Go on, monsieur. Here I am, ready to give you any explanation you desire." "Why," said Danglars, "in the letter, I believe I have it about me." Here he felt in his breast-pocket. "Yes, here it is. Well, this letter gives the Count of Monte Cristo unlimited credit on our house." "Well, Baron, what is there difficult to understand about that?" "Merely the term unlimited. Nothing else, certainly." "Is not that word known in France? The people who wrote are Anglo-Germans, you know." "Oh, as for the composition of the letter, there is nothing to be said. But as regards the competency of the document, I certainly have doubts." "Is it possible," asked the Count, assuming all air and tone of the utmost simplicity and candour, "is it possible that Thomson and French are not looked upon as safe and solvent bankers? Pray, tell me what you think, Baron, for I feel uneasy. I can assure you, having some considerable property in their hands." "Thomson and French are perfectly solvent," replied Danglars, with an almost mocking smile. "But the word unlimited in financial affairs is so extremely vague." "Is, in fact, unlimited," said Monte Cristo. "Precisely what I was about to say," cried Danglars. "Now what is vague is doubtful, and it was a wise man who said, 'When in doubt, keep out.'" "Meaning to say," rejoined Monte Cristo, "that however Thomson and French may be inclined to commit acts of imprudence and folly, the Baron Danglars is not disposed to follow their example." "Not at all." "Plainly enough, Messrs. Thomson and French set no bounds to their engagements, while those of Monsieur Danglars have their limits. He is a wise man according to his own showing." "Monsieur," replied the banker, drawing himself up with a haughty air, "the extent of my resources has never yet been questioned." "It seems, then, reserved for me," said Monte Cristo coldly, "to be the first to do so." "By what right, sir?" "By right of the objections you have raised and the explanations you have demanded, which certainly must have some motive." Once more Danglars bit his lips. It was the second time he had been worsted, and this time on his own ground. His forced politeness sat awkwardly upon him and approached almost to impertinence. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, preserved a graceful suavity of demeanour, aided by a certain degree of simplicity he could assume at pleasure, and thus possessed the advantage. "Well, sir," resumed Danglars, after a brief silence, "I will endeavour to make myself understood by requesting you to inform me for what sum you propose to draw upon me." "Why, truly," replied Monte Cristo, determined not to lose an inch of the ground he had gained, "my reason for desiring an unlimited credit was precisely because I did not know how much money I might need." The banker thought the time had come for him to take the upper hand, so throwing himself back in his armchair, he said with an arrogant and purse-proud air, "Let me beg of you not to hesitate in naming your wishes. You will then be convinced that the resources of the house of Danglars, however limited, are still equal to meeting the largest demands, and were you even to require 1,000,000— "I beg your pardon," interposed Monte Cristo. "I said 1,000,000," replied Danglars, with the confidence of ignorance. "But could I do with 1,000,000?" retorted the Count. "My dear sir, if a trifle like that would suffice me, I should never have given myself the trouble of opening an account. 1,000,000? Excuse my smiling when you speak of a sum I am in the habit of carrying in my pocket-book or dressing-case." And with these words Monte Cristo took from his pocket a small case containing his visiting cards, and drew forth 2 orders on the Treasury for 500,000 francs each, payable at sight to the bearer. A man like Danglars was wholly inaccessible to any gentler method of correction. The effect of the present revelation was stunning. He trembled, and was on the verge of apoplexy. The pupils of his eyes, as he gazed at Monte Cristo, dilated horribly. "Come, come," said Monte Cristo, "confess honestly that you have not perfect confidence in Thomson and French. I understand, and foreseeing that such might be the case, I took, in spite of my ignorance of affairs, certain precautions. See, here are 2 similar letters to that you have yourself received, one from the house of Astein and Esquel of Vienna, and Baron Rothschild, the other drawn by Baring of London upon Monsieur Lafitte. Now, sir, you have but to say the word, and I will spare you all uneasiness by presenting my letter of credit to one or other of these 2 firms." The blow had struck home, and Danglars was entirely vanquished. With a trembling hand he took the 2 letters from the Count, who held them carelessly between finger and thumb, and proceeded to scrutinize the signatures with a minuteness that the Count might have regarded as insulting, had it not suited his present purpose to mislead the banker. "Oh, sir," said Danglars, after he had convinced himself of the authenticity of the documents he beheld, and rising as if to salute the power of gold personified in the man before him, "3 letters of unlimited credit. I can be no longer mistrustful, but you must pardon me, my dear Count, for confessing to some degree of astonishment." "Nay," answered Monte Cristo with the most gentlemanly air, "'tis not for such trifling sums as these that your banking house is to be accommoded. Then you can let me have some money, can you not?" "Whatever you say, my dear Count, I am at your orders." "Why," replied Monte Cristo, "since we mutually understand each other, for such I presume is the case." Danglars bowed assentingly. "You are quite sure that not a lurking doubt or suspicion lingers in your mind?" "Oh, my dear Count," exclaimed Danglars, "I never for an instant entertained such a feeling toward you." "No, you merely wished to be convinced, nothing more. But now that we have come to so clear an understanding, and that all distrust and suspicion are laid at rest, we may as well fix a sum as the probable expenditure of the first year. Suppose we say 6,000,000 to—" "6,000,000?" gasped Danglars. "So be it." "Then if I should require more," continued Monte Cristo in a careless manner, "why, of course, I should draw upon you, but my present intention is not to remain in France more than a year. and during that period I scarcely think I shall exceed the sum I mentioned. However, we shall see. Be kind enough, then, to send me 500,000 francs tomorrow. I shall be at home till midday, or if not I will leave a receipt with my steward." "The money you desire shall be at your house by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, my dear Count," replied Danglars. "How would you like to have it, in gold, silver, or notes?" "Half in gold and the other half in banknotes, if you please," said the Count, rising from his seat. "I must confess to you, Count," said Danglars, "that I have hitherto imagined myself acquainted with the degree of all the great fortunes of Europe, and still wealth such as yours has been wholly unknown to me. May I presume to ask whether you have long possessed it?" "It has been in the family a very long while," returned Monte Cristo. "A sort of treasure expressly forbidden to be touched for a certain period of years, during which the accumulated interest has doubled the capital. The period appointed by the testator for the disposal of these riches occurred only a short time ago, and they have only been employed by me within the last few years. Your ignorance on the subject, therefore, is easily accounted for. However, you will be better informed as to me and my possessions ere long." And the Count, while pronouncing these latter words, accompanied them with one of those ghastly smiles that used to strike terror into poor Franz d'Épinay. "With your taste and means of gratifying them," continued Danglars, "you will exhibit a splendour that must effectually put us poor miserable millionaire quite in the shade. If I mistake you not an admirer of paintings, at least I judged you so from the attention you appeared to be bestowing on mine when I entered the room. If you will permit me, I shall be happy to show you my picture gallery, composed entirely of works by the ancient masters, warranted as such. Not a modern picture among them. I cannot endure the modern school of painting." "You are perfectly right in objecting to them, for this one great fault, that they have not yet had time to become old." "Or will you allow me to show you several fine statues by Thorwaldsen, Bortoloni, and Canova, all foreign artists, for, as you may perceive, I think but very indifferently of our French sculptors." "You have a right to be unjust to them, monsieur. They are your compatriots." "But all this may come later, when we shall be better known to each other. For the present I will confine myself, if perfectly agreeable to you, to introducing you to the Baroness Danglars. Excuse my impatience, my dear Count, but a client like you is almost like a member of the family." Monte Cristo bowed in sign that he accepted the proffered honour. Danglars rang, and was answered by a servant in a showy livery. "Is the Baroness at home?" inquired Danglars. "Yes, my lord," answered the man. "And alone?" "No, my lord. Madame has visitors." "Have you any objection to meet any persons who may be with Madame, or do you desire to preserve a strict incognito?" "No, indeed," replied Monte Cristo with a smile. "I do not arrogate to myself the right of so doing." "And who is with Madame, Monsieur d'Aubray?" inquired Danglars, with an air of indulgence and good nature that made Monte Cristo smile, acquainted as he was with the secrets of the banker's domestic life. "Yes, my lord," replied the servant. "Monsieur d'Aubray is with Madame." Danglars nodded his head, then turning to Monte Cristo said, "Monsieur Lucien d'Aubray is an old friend of mine, and private secretary to the Minister of the Interior. As for my wife, I must tell you, she lowered herself by marrying me, for she belongs to one of the most ancient families in France. Her maiden name was de Servières, and her first husband was Colonel the Marquis of Nargonne." "I have not the honour of knowing Madame Danglars, but I have already met Monsieur Lucien d'Aubray." "Ah, indeed," said Danglars. "And where was that?" "At the house of Monsieur de Morcerf." "Aha! You are acquainted with the young viscount, are you?" We were together a good deal during the carnival at Rome." "True, true," cried Danglars. "Let me see. Have I not heard talk of some strange adventure with bandits or thieves hid in ruins, and of his having had a miraculous escape? I forget how, but I know he used to amuse my wife and daughter by telling them about it after his return from Italy." "Her ladyship is waiting to receive you, gentlemen," said the servant, who had gone to inquire the pleasure of his mistress. "With your permission," said Danglars, bowing, "I will precede you to show you the way." "By all means," replied Monte Cristo. "I follow you." End of chapter 46. Chapter 47. The Dappled Greys. The Baron, followed by the Count, traversed a long series of apartments in which the prevailing characteristics were heavy magnificence and the gaudiness of ostentatious wealth, until he reached the boudoir of Madame Danglars, a small octagonal-shaped room, hung with pink satin covered with white Indian muslin. The chairs were of ancient workmanship and materials. Over the doors were painted sketches of shepherds and shepherdesses, after the style and manner of Boucher, and at each side pretty medallions in crayons, harmonizing well with the furnishings of this charming apartment, the only one throughout the great mansion in which any distinctive taste prevailed. The truth was, it had been entirely overlooked in the plan arranged and followed out by Monsieur Danglars and his architect, who had been selected to aid the Baron in the great work of improvement solely because he was the most fashionable and celebrated decorator of the day. The decorations of the boudoir had been left entirely to Madame Danglars and Lucien Debray. Monsieur Danglars, however, while possessing a great admiration for the antique, as it was understood during the time of the Directory, entertained the most sovereign contempt for the simple elegance of his wife's favourite sitting-room, where, by the way, he was never permitted to intrude, unless, indeed, he excused his own appearance by ushering in some more agreeable visitor than himself. And even then, he had rather the air and manner of a person who was himself introduced than that of being the presenter of another, his reception being cordial or frigid in proportion as the person who accompanied him chanced to please or displease the Baroness. Madame Danglars, who, although past the first bloom of youth, was still strikingly handsome, was now seated at the piano, a most elaborate piece of cabinet and inlaid work, which Lucien Debray, standing before a small work-table, was turning over the pages of an album. Lucien had found time preparatory to the Count's arrival to relate many particulars respecting him to Madame Danglars. It will be remembered that Monte Cristo had made a lively impression on the minds of all the party assembled at the breakfast given by Albert de Morcerf, and although Debray was not in the habit of yielding to such feelings, he had never been able to shake off the powerful influence excited in his mind by the impressive look and manner of the Count. Consequently, the description given by Lucien to the Baroness bore the highly coloured tinge of his own heated imagination. Already excited by the wonderful stories related of the Count by de Morcerf, it is no wonder that Madame Danglars eagerly listened to and fully credited all the additional circumstances detailed by Debray. This posing at the piano and over the album was only a little ruse adopted by way of precaution. A most gracious welcome and unusual smile were bestowed on Monsieur Danglars. The Count, in return for his gentlemanly bow, received a formal though graceful courtesy, while Lucien exchanged with the Count a sort of distant recognition, and with Danglars a free and easy nod. "Baroness," said Danglars, "give me leave to present to you the Count of Monte Cristo, who has been most warmly recommended to me by my correspondent at Rome. I need but mention one fact to make all the ladies in Paris court his notice, and that is that he has come to take up his abode in Paris for a year, during which brief period he proposes to spend 6 millions of money. That means balls, dinners, and lawn parties without end, in all of which I trust the Count will remember us, as he may depend upon it we shall him in our own humble entertainments." In spite of the gross flattery and coarseness of this address, Madame Danglars could not forbear gazing with considerable interest on a man capable of expending 6 millions in 12 months, and who had selected Paris for the scene of his princely extravagance. "And when did you arrive here?" inquired she. "Yesterday morning, madame." "Coming as usual, I presume, from the extreme end of the globe. Pardon me, at least such I have heard is your custom." "Nay, madame, this time I have merely come from Cadiz." "You have selected a most unfavourable moment for your first visit. Paris is a horrible place in summer. Balls, parties, and fêtes are over. The Italian opera is in London, the French opera everywhere except in Paris. As for the Théâtre Français, you know, of course, that it is nowhere. The only amusements left us are the indifferent races at the Champ de Mars and Sartory. Do you propose entering any horses at either of these races, Count?" "I shall do whatever they do at Paris, madame, if I have the good fortune to find someone who will initiate me into the prevalent ideas of amusement." "Are you fond of horses, Count?" "I have passed a considerable part of my life in the East, madame, and you are doubtless aware that the Orientals value only two things, the fine breeding of their horses and the beauty of their women." "Nay, Count," said the Baroness, "it would have been somewhat more gallant to have placed the ladies first." "You see, madame, how rightly I spoke when I said I required a preceptor to guide me in all my sayings and doings here." At this instant, the favourite attendant of Madame Danglars entered the boudoir. Approaching her mistress, she spoke some words in an undertone. Madame Danglars turned very pale, then exclaimed, "I cannot believe it! The thing is impossible!" "I assure you, madame," replied the woman, "it is as I have said." Turning impatiently toward her husband, Madame Danglars demanded, "Is this true?" "Is what true, madame?" inquired Danglars, visibly agitated. "What my maid tells me." "But what does she tell you?" "That when my coachman was about to harness the horses to my carriage, he discovered that they had been removed from the stables without his knowledge. I desire to know what is the meaning of this." "Be kind enough, madame, to listen to me," said Danglars. "Oh, yes, I will listen, monsieur, for I am most curious to hear what explanation you will give. These two gentlemen shall decide between us, but first I shall state the case to them. Gentlemen," continued the Baroness, "among the 10 horses in the stables of Baron Danglars are 2 that belong exclusively to me, a pair of the handsomest and most spirited creatures to be found in Paris. But to you at least, Monsieur Debray, I need not give a further description, because to you my beautiful pair of dapple greys were well known. Well, I had promised Madame de Villefort the loan of my carriage to drive tomorrow to the Bois. But when my coachman goes to fetch the greys from the stables, they are gone, positively gone. No doubt Monsieur Danglars has sacrificed them to the selfish consideration of gaining some thousands of paltry francs. Oh, what a detestable crew they are, those mercenary speculators!" "Madame," replied Danglars, "the horses were not sufficiently quiet for you. They were scarcely 4 years old, and they made me extremely uneasy on your account." "Nonsense!" retorted the Baroness. "You could not have entertained any alarm on the subject, because you are perfectly aware that I have had for a month in my service the very best coachman in Paris. But perhaps you have disposed of the coachman as well as the horses." "My dear love, pray do not say any more about them, and I promise you another pair exactly like them in appearance, only more quiet and steady." The Baroness shrugged her shoulders with an air of ineffable contempt, while her husband, affecting not to observe this unconjugal gesture, turned towards Monte Cristo and said, "Upon my word, Count, I am quite sorry not to have met you sooner. You are setting up an establishment, of course?" "Why, yes," replied the Count. "I should have liked to have made you the offer of these horses. I have almost given them away as it is. But as I before said, I was anxious to get rid of them upon any terms. They were only fit for a young man." "I am much obliged by your kind intentions towards me," said Monte Cristo. "But this morning I purchased a very excellent pair of carriage horses, and I do not think they were dear. There they are. Come, Monsieur Debray, you are a connoisseur, I believe. Let me have your opinion upon them." As Debray walked towards the window, Danglars approached his wife. "I could not tell you before others," said he in a low tone, "the reason of my parting with the horses, but a most enormous price was offered me this morning for them. Some madman or fowl bent upon running himself as fast as he can actually sent his steward to me to purchase them at any cost, and the fact is, I have gained 16,000 francs by the sale of them. Come, don't look so angry, and you shall have 4,000 francs of the money to do what you like with, and Eugénie shall have 2,000. There, what do you think now of the affair? Wasn't I right to part with the horses?" Madame Danglars surveyed her husband with a look of withering contempt. "Great heavens!" suddenly exclaimed Debray. "What is it?" asked the Baroness. "I cannot be mistaken. There are your horses, the very animals we were speaking of, harnessed to the Count's carriage." "My dappled greys?" demanded the Baroness, springing to the window. "'Tis indeed they," said she. Danglars looked absolutely stupefied. "How very singular!" cried Monte Cristo with well-feigned astonishment. "I cannot believe it," murmured the banker. Madame Danglars whispered a few words in the ear of Debray, who approached Monte Cristo, saying, "The Baroness wishes to know what you paid her husband for the horses." "I scarcely know," replied the Count. "It was a little surprise prepared for me by my steward, and cost me, well, somewhere about 30,000 francs." Debray conveyed the Count's reply to the Baroness. Poor Danglars looked so crestfallen and discomfited that Monte Cristo assumed a pitying air towards him. "See," said the Count, "how very ungrateful women are. Your kind attention in providing for the safety of the Baroness by disposing of the horses does not seem to have made the least impression on her. But so it is. A woman will often, from mere wilfulness, prefer that which is dangerous to that which is safe. Therefore, in my opinion, my dear Baron, the best and easiest way is to leave them to their fancies, and allow them to act as they please, and then, if any mischief follows, why, at least, they have no one to blame but themselves." Danglars made no reply, but he was occupied in anticipation of the coming scene between himself and the Baroness, whose frowning brow, like that of Olympic Jove, predicted a storm. Debray, who perceived the gathering clouds, and felt no desire to witness the explosion of Madame Danglars' rage, suddenly recollected an appointment which compelled him to take his leave, while Monte Cristo, unwilling by prolonging his stay to destroy the advantages he hoped to obtain, made a farewell bow and departed, leaving Danglars to endure the angry reproaches of his wife. "Excellent," murmured Monte Cristo to himself as he came away. "All has gone according to my wishes. The domestic peace of this family is henceforth in my hands. Now, then, to play another master stroke by which I shall gain the heart of both husband and wife. Delightful! Still," added he, "amid all this, I have not yet been presented to Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars, whose acquaintance I should have been glad to make, but," he went on with his peculiar smile, "I am here in Paris, and have plenty of time before me. By and by will do for that." With these reflections he entered his carriage and returned home. 2 hours afterwards Madame Danglars received a most flattering epistle from the Count, in which he entreated her to receive back her favourite dappled greys, protesting that he could not endure the idea of making his entry into the Parisian world of fashion with the knowledge that his splendid equipage had been obtained at the price of a lovely woman's regrets. The horses were sent back, wearing the same harness she had seen on them in the morning, only, by the Count's orders, in the centre of each rosette that adorned either side of their heads had been fastened a large diamond. To Danglars, Monte Cristo also wrote, requesting him to excuse the whimsical gift of a capricious millionaire, and to beg the Baroness to pardon the Eastern fashion adopted in the return of the horses. During the evening Monte Cristo quitted Paris for Auteuil, accompanied by Ali. The following day, about 3 o'clock, a single blow struck on the gong summoned Ali to the presence of the Count. "Ali," observed his master, as the Nubian entered the chamber, "you have frequently explained to me how more than commonly skilful you are in throwing the lasso, have you not?" Ali drew himself up proudly, and then returned the sign in the affirmative. "I thought I did not mistake. With your lasso you could stop an ox." Again Ali repeated his affirmative gesture. "Or a tiger." Ali bowed his head in token of assent. "A lion, even." Ali sprung forwards, imitating the action of one throwing the lasso, then of a strangled lion. "I understand," said Monte Cristo. "You wish to tell me you have hunted the lion." Ali smiled with triumphant pride as he signified that he had indeed both chased and captured many lions. "But do you believe you could arrest the progress of 2 horses rushing forwards with ungovernable fury?" The Nubian smiled. "It is well," said Monte Cristo. "Then listen to me. Ere long a carriage will dash past here, drawn by the pair of dappled grey horses you saw me with yesterday. Now, at the risk of your own life, you must manage to stop these horses before my door." Ali descended to the street, and marked a straight line on the pavement immediately at the entrance of the house, and then pointed out the line he had traced to the Count, who was watching him. The Count patted him gently on the shoulder, his usual mode of praising Ali, who, pleased and gratified with the commission assigned him, walked calmly towards a projecting stone forming the angle of the street and house, and, seating himself thereon, began to smoke his chibouque, while Monte Cristo re-entered his dwelling, perfectly assured of the success of his plan. Still, as 5 o'clock approached, and the carriage was momentarily expected by the Count, the indication of more than common impatience and uneasiness might be observed in his manner. He stationed himself in a room commanding a view of the street, pacing the chamber with restless steps, stopping merely to listen from time to time for the sound of approaching wheels, then to cast an anxious glance on Ali, but the regularity with which the Nubian puffed forth the smoke of his chibouque proved that he at least was wholly absorbed in the enjoyment of his favourite occupation. Suddenly a distant sound of rapidly advancing wheels was heard, and almost immediately a carriage appeared, drawn by a pair of wild, ungovernable horses, while the terrified coachman strove in vain to restrain their furious speed. In the vehicle was a young woman and a child of about 7 or 8 clasped in each other's arms. Terror seemed to have deprived them even of the power of uttering a cry. The carriage creaked and rattled as it flew over the rough stones, and the slightest obstacle under the wheels would have caused disaster. But it kept on in the middle of the road, and those who saw it passed uttered cries of terror. Ali suddenly cast aside his chibouque, drew the lasso from his pocket, threw it so skilfully as to catch the forelegs of the near horse in its triple fold, and suffered himself to be dragged on for a few steps by the violence of the shock. Then the animal fell over on the pole, which snapped, and therefore prevented the other horse from pursuing its way. Gladly availing himself of this opportunity, the coachman leapt from his box, but Ali had promptly seized the nostrils of the second horse and held them in his iron grasp, till the beast, snorting with pain, sunk beside his companion. All this was achieved in much less time than is occupied in the recital. The brief space had, however, been sufficient for a man followed by a number of servants to rush from the house before which the accident had occurred, and, as the coachman opened the door of the carriage, to take from it a lady who was convulsively grasping the cushions with one hand, while the other she pressed to her bosom the young boy who had lost consciousness. Monte Cristo carried them both to the salon and deposited them on a sofa. "Compose yourself, madame," said he. "All danger is over." The woman looked up at these words, and with a glance far more expressive than any entreaties could have been, pointed to her child, who still continued insensible. "I understand the nature of your alarms, madame," said the Count, carefully examining the child, "but I assure you there is not the slightest occasion for uneasiness. Your little charge has not received the least injury. His insensibility is merely the effects of terror, and will soon pass." "Are you quite sure you do not say so to tranquillize my fears? See how deadly pale he is. My child, my darling Edward, speak to your mother, open your dear eyes, and look on me once again. Oh, sir, in pity, send for a physician. My whole fortune shall not be thought too much for the recovery of my boy." With a calm smile and a gentle wave of the hand, Monte Cristo signed to the distracted mother to lay aside her apprehensions. Then, opening a casket that stood near, he drew forth a phial of Bohemian glass encrusted with gold, containing a liquid of the colour of blood, of which he let fall a single drop on the child's lips. Scarcely had it reached them ere the boy, though still pale as marble, opened his eyes and eagerly gazed around him. At this, the delight of the mother was almost frantic. "Where am I?" exclaimed she, "and to whom am I indebted for so happy a termination to my late dreadful alarm?" "Madame," answered the Count, "you are under the roof of one who esteems himself most fortunate in having been able to save you from a further continuance of your sufferings." "My wretched curiosity has brought all this about," pursued the lady. "All Paris rang with the praises of Madame Danglars' beautiful horses, and I had the folly to desire to know whether they really merited the high praise given to them." "Is it possible," exclaimed the Count with well-feigned astonishment, "that these horses belong to the Baroness?" "They do, indeed. May I inquire if you are acquainted with Madame Danglars?" "I have that honour, and my happiness at your escape from the danger that threatened you is redoubled by the consciousness that I have been the unwilling and the unintentional cause of all the peril you have incurred. I yesterday purchased these horses of the Baron, but as the Baroness evidently regretted parting with them, I ventured to send them back to her, with a request that she would gratify me by accepting them from my hands." "You are, then, doubtless, the Count of Monte Cristo, of whom Hermine has talked to me so much?" "You have rightly guessed, madame," replied the Count. "And I am Madame Héloïse de Villefort." The Count bowed with the air of a person who hears a name for the first time. "How grateful will Monsieur de Villefort be for all your goodness! How thankful will he acknowledge that to you alone he owes the existence of his wife and child! Most certainly, but for the prompt assistance of your intrepid servant, this dear child and myself must both have perished." "Indeed, I shall shudder at the fearful danger you were placed in." "I trust you will allow me to recompense worthily the devotion of your man." "I beseech you, madam," replied Monte Cristo, "not to spoil Ali, either by too great praise or rewards. I cannot allow him to acquire the habit of expecting to be recompensed for every trifling service he may render. Ali is my slave, and in saving your life he was but discharging his duty to me." "Nay," interposed Madame de Villefort, on whom the authoritative style adopted by the Count made a deep impression. "Nay, but consider that to preserve my life he has risked his own." "His life, madame, belongs not to him, it is mine, in return for my having myself saved him from death." Madame de Villefort made no further reply. Her mind was utterly absorbed in the contemplation of the person who, from the first instant she saw him, had made so powerful an impression on her. During the evident preoccupation of Madame de Villefort, Monte Cristo scrutinized the features and appearance of the boy she kept folded in her arms, lavishing on him the most tender endearments. The child was small for his age and unnaturally pale. A mass of straight black hair, defying all attempts to train or curl it, fell over his projecting forehead and hung down to his shoulders, giving increased vivacity to eyes already sparkling with the youthful love of mischief and fondness for every forbidden enjoyment. His mouth was large, and the lips, which had not yet regained their colour, were particularly thin. In fact, the deep and crafty look, giving a predominant expression to the child's face, belonged rather to a boy of 12 or 14 than to one so young. His first movement was to free himself by a violent push from the encircling arms of his mother, and to rush forward to the casket from whence the Count had taken the phial of elixir. Then, without asking permission of anyone, he proceeded in all the wilfulness of a spoiled child unaccustomed to restrain either whims or caprices, to pull the corks out of all the bottles. "Touch nothing, my little friend," cried the Count eagerly. "Some of those liquids are not only dangerous to taste, but even to inhale." Madame de Villefort became very pale, and, seizing her son's arm, drew him anxiously toward her. But, once satisfied of his safety, she also cast a brief but expressive glance on the casket, which was not lost upon the Count. At this moment Ali entered. At sight of him, Madame de Villefort uttered an expression of pleasure, and, holding the child still closer toward her, she said, "Edward, dearest, do you see that good man? He has shown very great courage and resolution, for he exposed his own life to stop the horses that were running away with us and would certainly have dashed the carriage to pieces. Thank him, then, my child, in your very best manner, for had he not come to our aid, neither you nor I would have been alive to speak our thanks." The child stuck out his lips and turned away his head in a disdainful manner, saying, "He's too ugly." The Count smiled as if the child bade fair to realize his hopes, while Madame de Villefort reprimanded her son with a gentleness and moderation very far from conveying the least idea of a fault having been committed. "This lady," said the Count, speaking to Ali in the Arabic language, "is desirous that her son should thank you for saving both their lives. But the boy refuses, saying you are too ugly." Ali turned his intelligent countenance towards the boy, on whom he gazed without any apparent emotion, but the spasmodic working of the nostrils showed to the practised eye of Monte Cristo that the Arab had been wounded to the heart. "Will you permit me to inquire," said Madame de Villefort, as she arose to take her leave, "whether you usually reside here?" "No, I do not," replied Monte Cristo. "It is a small place I have purchased quite lately. My place of abode is number 30 Avenue des Champs-Élysées, but I see you have quite recovered from your fright, and are no doubt desirous of returning home. Anticipating your wishes, I have desired the same horses you came with to be put to one of my carriages, and Ali, he whom you think so very ugly, continued he, addressing the boy with a smiling air, will have the honour of driving you home, while your coachman remains here to attend to the necessary repairs of your calash. As soon as that important business is concluded, I will have a pair of my own horses harnessed to convey it direct to Madame Danglars." "I dare not return with those dreadful horses," said Madame de Villefort. "You will see," replied Monte Cristo, "that they will be as different as possible in the hands of Ali. With him they will be gentle and docile as lambs." Ali had indeed given proof of this, for approaching the animals, who had been got upon their legs with considerable difficulty, he rubbed their foreheads and nostrils with a sponge soaked in aromatic vinegar, and wiped off the sweat and foam that covered their mouths. Then, commencing a loud whistling noise, he rubbed them well all over their bodies for several minutes, then, undisturbed by the noisy crowd collected round the broken carriage, Ali quietly harnessed the pacified animals to the Count's chariot, took the reins in his hands, and mounted the box, when, to the utter astonishment of those who had witnessed the ungovernable spirit and maddened speed of the same horses, he was actually compelled to apply his whip in no very gentle manner before he could induce them to start. And even then, all that could be obtained from the celebrated dappled greys, now changed into a couple of dull, sluggish, stupid brutes, was a slow, pottering pace, kept up with so much difficulty that Madame de Villefort was more than 2 hours returning to her residence in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Scarcely had the first congratulations upon her marvellous escape been gone through, when she wrote the following letter to Madame Danglars. "Dear Hermine, I have just had a wonderful escape from the most imminent danger, and I owe my safety to the very Count of Monte Cristo we were talking about yesterday, but whom I little expected to see to-day. I remember how unmercifully I laughed at what I consider your eulogistic and exaggerated praises of him, but I have now ample cause to admit that your enthusiastic description of this wonderful man fell far short of his merits. Your horses got as far as Ranelagh, when they darted forward like mad things, and galloped away at such a fearful rate that there seemed no other prospect for myself and my poor Edward but that of being dashed to pieces against the first object that impeded their progress, when a strange-looking man, an Arab, a Negro, or a Nubian, at least a black of some nation or other, at a signal from the Count, whose domestic he is, suddenly seized and stopped the infuriated animals, even at the risk of being trampled to death himself. And certainly he must have had a most wonderful escape. The Count then hastened to us and took us into his house, where he speedily recalled my poor Edward to life. He sent us home in his own carriage. Yours will be returned to you tomorrow. You will find your horses in bad condition from the results of this accident. They seem thoroughly stupefied, as if sulky and vexed at having been conquered by man. The Count, however, has commissioned me to assure you that 2 or 3 days' rest, with plenty of barley for their sole food during that time, will bring them back to as fine, that is, as terrifying a condition as they were in yesterday. Adieu. I cannot return you many thanks for the drive of yesterday, but, after all, I ought not to blame you for the misconduct of your horses, more especially as it procured me the pleasure of an introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, and certainly that illustrious personage, apart from the millions he is said to be so very anxious to dispose of, seemed to me one of those curiously interesting problems I, for one, delight in solving at any risk, even if it were to necessitate another drive to the bois behind your horses. Edward endured the accident with miraculous courage. He did not utter a single cry, but fell lifeless into my arms, nor did a tear fall from his eyes after it was over. I doubt not you will consider these praises the result of blind maternal affection, but there is a soul of iron in that delicate, fragile body. Valentine sends many affectionate remembrances to your dear Eugenie. I embrace you with all my heart. Eloise de Villefort. P.S. Do pray contrive some means for me to meet the Count of Monte Cristo at your house. I must and will see him again. I have just made Monsieur de Villefort promise to call on him, and I hope the visit will be returned. That night the adventure at Auteuil was talked of everywhere. Albert related it to his mother. Chateau Renaud recounted it at the Jockey Club, and Debray detailed it at length in the salons of the minister. Even Beauchamp accorded 20 lines in his journal to the relation of the Count's courage and gallantry, thereby celebrating him as the greatest hero of the day in the eyes of all the feminine members of the aristocracy. Vast was the crowd of visitors and inquiring friends who left their names at the residence of Madame de Villefort, with the design of renewing their visit at the right moment, of hearing from her lips all the interesting circumstances of the most romantic adventure. As for Monsieur de Villefort, he fulfilled the predictions of Eloise to the letter, donned his dress suit, drew on a pair of white gloves, ordered the servants to attend the carriage dressed in their full livery, and drove that same night to Numéro 30 in the Avenue des Champs-Élysées. End of chapter 47.
Did the Count not have Danglars' number? Holy smoke. I thought that was some brilliant work on, well, certainly on Dumas' part, but just all the way around. That was fantastic. I even read this part of the chapter out loud to my husband because I just said it is such a brilliant piece of writing. From the very beginning where he's combing his hair forward over his forehead so that you can't notice quite the wrinkles and that his hair's just too dark a shade of black, so he's probably been dyeing it. And Danglars with comb over. Oh my gosh. Okay, so that was hilarious. But then the way that the Count found to constantly not just insult Danglars, but keep him off guard and keep him off his stable footing, so that he constantly thinks he's about to get the upper hand, not understanding exactly how the Count is going to trap him. He just kept getting outflanked by the Count, and I loved that. And then, of course, there are all of Dumas' little backhanded comments about Danglars, the way that he decorated and that he hired the best architect, not because he was the best, but because he was the most popular at the time in that name-dropping way. And then, of course, there's the Baroness, who's got her boyfriend in the room with her, and the Baron knows it. And his whole, here, have some of the money, just shut up about the horses. They have a wonderful, loving relationship, I can tell. And then Madame de Villefort's relationship with Madame Danglars. So they're friends. And Madame Villefort's son, Edouard, seems like a peach. And she seems like an interesting person. Something's up with her. And Ali. Ali is going to continue to be a cipher for a while. And he's a complicated character for us nowadays because so many things about what the Count of Monte Cristo says in relationship to Ali I find awfully disturbing. He constantly refers to him as a slave. He's not a servant, he's a slave. Of course, Ali is black. He's Nubian. Ali, as we know, had his tongue cut out, and that happened before the Count actually knew him. Ali seems to be absolutely devoted to the Count of Monte Cristo. Count of Monte Cristo apparently is telling him all sorts of horrible things, like, the kid thinks you're too ugly. Why would you say that? Why would you say that unless you want to make sure that Ali knows exactly who he's dealing with? He has his orders from the Count, we know that, and it's pretty cruel. At the same time, if Ali's heart is soft, and it seems that it is, perhaps forewarned is forearmed. And in that same vein, I don't know if you've noticed the few times that we've been in contact with Ali as a character so far in the book, the Count will talk to him one way in front of other people and will then translate himself, evidently in Arabic, to Ali, which leads you to believe that their relationship is absolutely, as the Count of Monte Cristo is saying to everybody else, master-slave relationship, which, again, I find upsetting. However, one of the things you may have noticed so far about Ali is that there are also constant references to, after those moments, the Count and Ali go away where nobody else is, and they talk for quite a long time. They confer, they have a conference, they plan together. Now, we saw with Baptistine that the Count is absolutely calculating when it comes to his staff. I don't want you talking about me to anyone, not saying something positive, not saying something negative. I don't want you commenting on me outside to anyone at all, or actually even inside. He's pretty clear. He just doesn't want anybody talking about his business or him. But of course, he's making it worth their while to keep their mouth shut. Because if the difference is between making 2 francs a day or 1,500 francs a year, plus the interest on whatever money's being invested for you for every year that you work for the Count, that's a tidy sum. Why would you blow that gig? You wouldn't. So he's making it worth everyone's while to work for him, which we saw before with Bertuccio. We see more detail on it now with Baptistine. We now know that he doesn't abuse his position. He doesn't beat his servants. He doesn't berate his servants. He would rather explain things several times than have people get things wrong. Mistakes can be forgiven, but big mistakes really can be forgiven only once, and then you're out. But when you look at things in the grand scheme of the world at that time, not being beaten, not being mistreated, being paid more than well, being given room and board and clothes, and a position of some immense respect, which is only growing as the Count of Monte Cristo's reputation grows, he's making sure he has an impenetrable wall around him, which is really pretty cool. But it also makes his relationship with Ali look, to me, far more interesting, because I cannot think but that there is something else going on here, for all of the reasons I already said, plus Dumas biracial. Either he's writing Ali this way because he knows his audience perhaps is not quite as enlightened as he might wish they were. There's, by the way, a new translation of Georges, which is a novel that Dumas wrote the year before this, which actually deals with race in France at this time head on. And I will put a link to that particular new translation of the book in the show notes. I was able to get it on Kindle, but it's also in paperback as well. So race is clearly something that Dumas recognizes as being at issue at the time. It's something that he has already dealt with. And the idea that he would be okay with mistreating an African slave at this time in France, I find hard to believe. So I am waiting to see what's up. But Ali's a very interesting character. And I love the image of him just sitting on the wall, smoking his cigarette, just waiting for the stupid carriage to come by so that he can rescue the woman and kind of get to show off with the horses. He's an interesting guy, and he knows a lot, as does the Count. Talk about a student of human nature. That man, international man of mystery. You're going to see it laid out so clearly over the next several chapters of exactly what kind of a James Bondian figure he is. In fact, my husband said, he's more like Nikolai Hell from Trevelyan's book Shibumi, which has not aged well over the years since it was written. But Nikolai Hell as a character is kind of fun. International, mysterious assassin guy. No country, no affiliation, just sexy and smart and a really good assassin. Not hard to figure out how far Trevelyan had to look to find an inspiration for that story. Oh, here's the Count of Monte Cristo. Count of Monte Cristo meet Nikolai Hell. And that's it. That's where we're going to stop this week. Have a great Thanksgiving if you are in the United States. I will talk to you. Let's see, we have the first 2 weeks of December. I will re-release our 12 Days of Christmas so that if you missed them last year, you will be able to catch up on all of the really wonderful short stories that I found for Christmas time. I'm not going to release any new ones. I'm not going to have time to do it this year, but maybe next year. I'll be able to pull some new ones for you. But as always, you'll be able to access The Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, The 12 Days of Christmas, and you'll get 2 more episodes of The Count of Monte Cristo before the end of the year. All right, take care of yourself. Love each other. Be safe. Be well. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. If you like getting free audiobooks with benefits every week, please consider supporting the show over at patreon.com/craftlit. There are rewards waiting for you beyond, the free podcast. You can also subscribe to our premium streaming audio by tapping the red lock when you are looking at the app or at the show notes at craftlit.libsyn.com/podcast. You can also sign up for a premium download subscription by following the links in the right-hand sidebar at craftlit.com. And if it's easier for you, you can always subscribe and review at iTunes and at Stitcher Radio. Like us on Facebook, support us at Patreon, and come with us on tour. For 9 years, Craftlit has been kept going by the support of you, the listener. And for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on